So here's a final simplified image of what we're going to work on for your interactive infographic. So there'll be a little animation in the beginning. Yours will be much more interesting than mine. And then we're going to create some buttons that have a hover action. So I hover over this and something pops up, and then another option is hovering over this and it changes colors and there's words in it. So we're using some skills we learned last time and just expanding on it. Okay, so I'm going to start in Illustrator, and you want to make the size of your document for web. So I would say, if we come into all the presets here, I would say the minimum you want to do is 1280 by 800, and that's what I'm going to work on for this, just so it's smaller, but you can make it bigger if you want as well. So I would say at least do 1280 by 800. And I'm just going to quickly show you, I have this all set up here. The important thing is that you want to have everything on its own separate layer. So I have the trees as one layer, I have the chart or graph as one layer, and I have the hills that I made just with the pen tool as one layer, and then the gradient and the background as another layer. And I usually lock my background just so when I'm clicking around it doesn't mess stuff up. So I'm just going to show you how to make an arrow and the chart really quickly. So to make the chart, I come into the pen tool up here, which is P on the keyboard, and you have your fill color and your stroke color. So I'm just going to double click to get a different stroke color. And I'm just going to click, click, click. You can see my appearance here, and I can come to the stroke and increase the stroke just to make it thicker. And then if I come back into the selection tool, which is V on the keyboard, that's a good one to learn, you can make it as thick or thin as you want, and you can always be selected on it, and if you don't like the color, you can change the color there too. And then for my bars for the chart, I just used the rectangle tool. And for that, I'm going to swap the fill and the stroke because I just want it filled and no stroke. And I can make it a different color and then just draw the bar any way that is going to make sense for your data. Oh, this had white around it, which I didn't realize, so I'm just going to click on the stroke color there and then click the None button, which is this with the little red dash through it. All right, so now it's just filled with red. And if I want it around the same size, the same width, you can come into your selection tool, which again is V on the keyboard, and you can press Option or Alt, and you see how the cursor changes to two little arrows, and you can just drag a copy that's keeping it the same width, and then I can just bring it down or up depending on what your data is, and then I can, while it's still selected, double click in here and change the color so you can have them all different colors. So make as many bars as you need. Then quickly, just to show you how to make the arrow, I'm in the line segment tool, and I'm just drawing a straight line. And you can hold shift to make sure it stays straight. So you can just press shift on the keyboard. And again, I'm coming here to my stroke and I'm giving it a color. So here we need to add a stroke color. I can make it orange. And then I'm increasing the weight on the stroke. If you don't see this window here, you can just come up to Window Appearance and make sure that's checked. So I'm increasing the weight on the stroke, and then I'm opening up the stroke panel by just clicking on stroke here. And we have different options for a dashed line, which there's a lot of different numbers you can input and play around with. Then I just wanted to show you the arrowheads. So you can choose which kind of arrow you want, and you can put one on each side, but I think for the chart that wouldn't really make sense, so you can go back to none. So you can just have that as a way to make your data more consistent and more interesting and show people what it's about. Okay, so you're gonna create your whole background file. You can create it in Illustrator. You can do some elements in Photoshop too if you would like, and then you're going to save it with all of the separate layers, and we're going to bring it into Animate. So click out of here, and I'm going to come into Animate, and we're going to do an HTML5 canvas. Same thing as before. So click on that. And we don't need to adjust the size because when we import our file, import to stage, when we import our Illustrator file, we can choose to have it the same size. So I have my Illustrator file. I'm going to press open, and then we're going to get a pop-up with some options. So we want this to be the Animate layers because we want to import it with all the different layers that we've created. And you also want to check this box, set stage size to the same as the Illustrator artboard, and it's telling you what the size is. That was 1280 by 800. So it's going to make the stage in Animate, the canvas in Animate, the same size as our Illustrator document. I'm just going to come into the timeline, give it a second to work, and you can see that it's all in there. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to set up the animation, because you're going to have some kind of animation in here. And this is a really important step that a lot of people missed in the last project, so I just want to make sure to explain it again this time. So I want my animation to be 1 second, and then I want it to stop. Yours can obviously be longer. So I'm clicking on each layer at the 1 second mark, which is frame 24, and I'm pressing F5. This is creating a frame, what's called a frame span, and we're setting up each layer's frame span, and that's how long the animation will last for. That's the animation won't play past this frame on the timeline. So you need to click on each one and press F5. Press F5, press F5. And then I'm going to make the trees, I'm going to animate them just a little bit. So I'm on the trees layer, and I'm right clicking, and I'm creating a motion tween. And they need to be converted into a symbol. I could have done that before, but Animate is going to do it for me with this warning. So yes, I want that to happen. And then you can see in my library, it's created a symbol for the trees, and I'm just going to make sure to stay organized, especially if you are going to have a lot of things animated. I'm going to call that trees. So just make sure you're keeping organized with that. Okay, so I just want my trees to start small and get bigger. So I'm going to add some keyframes in here. So I'm moving my timeline indicator down. I'm right clicking, and insert keyframe, and I'm just going to select all for this. And since this is where I want it to end up, I'm going to insert a keyframe at the beginning, and that's where I'm actually going to make the changes. So insert keyframe, all. And then I'm coming to this tool here, which is the free transform tool. And I'm holding Shift, I'm pressing Shift on the keyboard and grabbing it from the corner, making it smaller, and dragging it down. And then we see we have that animation path, and I can press play down here, just make sure it looks okay. Yours, again, will be much more interesting. Remember, you can right click in here and go to Refine Tween, and you can add an ease into it. Just do medium ease or fast, and you can also adjust the easing here as much as you want. So you can play around with that. When you want to get out of this Refine Tween, you just right click on it again and press Refine Tween. So we can see how that looks. Okay, mine's a little boring and slow. Yours will be much more interesting, but I'm just going to test it. I'm going to come up to Control and Test to see how it looks. Okay, so I brought it into, I'm testing it in Chrome, and we can see the animation is just playing over and over again, which you might have noticed in your last project. So we want the animation to stop so people can work on the interactivity and, hover over stuff. So to do that, we're just going to add a little bit of code at the end. So I have my time indicator here at the end, at the last frame of my animation. And I'm coming up to code snippets. If you don't see this, you can go to Window, Code Snippets, and it'll pop up. I have mine sort of embedded in my panel here, so I can just open it up easily. So we're in HTML5 canvas, we're in timeline navigation, and we want to stop at this frame. We want to tell the computer to stop it at this frame and not keep playing it over and over. So I'm double clicking on that. The actions panel where the code is going to come up, and you see that it's giving you instructions. So we need to tell it which frame to stop at. If I look, I have my indicator where I want it to stop, and if I look at the bottom here, right here, you can see that it says 24. That's the frame that my timeline indicator is at. So wherever your last frame is, you're going to type in to these parentheses. So I'm just going to type 24 in here and press save if you haven't already saved it. And make sure you are saving often. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is add some of those interactive features. So we're going to create a button for this first chart bar, this first bar on the chart. So I'm selected on this bar, I have it highlighted, you can see my graph layer is selected. I'm right clicking and I'm converting it to a symbol. And we want it to be a button from the drop down, so make sure you choose button. And you might have a lot of these, so remember to stay organized. So BTN, short for button, and I'm going to call it chart 1. So I know it's the first one. You'll name yours whatever makes sense for your image, and press OK. And also get in the habit of giving everything an instance name. And the instance name should not be the same as the button name. And so a good thing, you can just reverse it, or I can just call it chart 1. And you probably want to know it's a button, so I'll call it chart, just the opposite of what I named the actual button. So I know a lot of people had some problems with their code, and it was because they weren't giving instance names. So make sure you're doing that. Okay, so then come back into the library, and we see that our button has been created, our chart 1 button. And we're going to double click on it to get into this that we've worked with before. And what we're going to do is we're just going to change the over state so that when someone hovers over it, they're getting information. So I'm right clicking in over, I'm inserting a keyframe, and you can change the color here if you want. And then I'm also going to add a little pop-up. So I'm clicked on this oval tool. I'm coming to my properties, and I'm going to take the stroke off of it. So the little pencil is the stroke, and I'm just going to hit this so there's no stroke, and I'm going to change the color to a bright green. And then I know I have some space up here in my infographic for lettering. So you can have it right over the bar. It just really depends on what your composition is. And then you can click on the text tool and change the color of that, and obviously change the font and everything, and you can just say trees provide whatever your information is that you have, and that's going to be the hover state of this. So design it however you want. Get in the habit of doing Command Control S to save. Click Scene up here to come back to your timeline. And you're going to do the same thing for each button you want to create, each place you want someone to hover. So let's test that first. So Control Test. And we'll see that the action for it to stop has been created. So it plays and it just stops there, which we wanted, so it doesn't keep on replaying the animation. And now when we hover over this bar, the little information pops up, and you can test yours, and can make adjustments. Like I probably don't want to have it overlapping the arrow. Maybe you do. You can make adjustments really based on yours and make yours look great. So next thing we're going to do is make a button for this item. So my second bar on the chart. So right click, convert to symbol, make sure it's a button, BTN, what do we call it? Chart 2, give it an instance name of chart2 btn, and then come into the library, and I'm going to double click on here. And now for this one, I want the text to be inside the actual bar. So I'm right clicking on over, insert keyframe. I'm going to change the color again. And then I'm just going to grab the text tool. I'm going to come into my properties so I can adjust it. I'm going to change the color. Maybe my font needs to be a little smaller since I'm writing in here. So I'm just if you're doing this in a smaller button, just make sure your text fits in, but it's still readable to someone looking at it. So you can make all kinds of adjustments. I'm going to come back into my selection tool and make sure it fits in. And you can put as much or as little as you want in there, totally based on your information that you have. And then we're going to save. And let's test it out, make sure it's working. Okay, the animation works and it stops. This hover works, and great, this hover works. So you can do this however you want. You can, get really creative with this. And then to save it, same thing as before. We're going to come to File, Publish Settings. You don't want it to loop, so uncheck that. Make sure it's saved to the right folder, which would be your M drive folder, and press Publish. Remember, if you press OK, nothing happens. It just saves these settings. You have to actually publish it to save it, and then make sure you test it from the M drive to see that it's working.